February. Good afternoon and welcome to the February 11th Finance Committee meeting of the State Bar. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. And could I have our committee coordinator, Sam Tesaro, please call the roll.
Yes, Barahona,
Present.
Buenaventura,
Present.
Grande,
Present.
Sowell,
Present.
Trejo. We have a quorum.
Very good. Next on our agenda is the call for public comment. And just as a reminder, I'd like to make sure that we are, I think as everyone knows, applying under the Bagley-Keene Open Meetings Act. And so public comments have to pertain to the items that are on the agenda and are related to matters that are before the and in the jurisdiction of the Finance Committee today. Just a reminder that the board staff will attempt to try to call on public commenters in the order that they appear, and that if you would like to make a public comment, if you press the *9 key in your that will you can virtually sort of raise your hand in that way, and that will alert the staff that you would like to try to make a public comment. You can also raise your hand in the Zoom function, and that we will not only try to get to folks that are on Zoom, but also if there is anyone that's located in the locations where our committee members are taking or being active as it relates to the Finance Committee today. We are, as a committee chair, going to set a 3-minute time limit on public comment. There will be a counter in the corner of your screen, and it will start flashing when you get to about 10 seconds, but it'll alert you when you have about 30 seconds left in your public comments. And so with that sort of preamble, do we have anyone that is signed up to be a public commenter today before the Finance Committee?
Yes, so we did have one advanced sign up, and that's Benjamin Cohn.
Mr. Cohn, are you there?
Yes, here. Thank you. I wanted to comment on the budget item specifically for the admissions budget. I wanted to say that the State Bar staff have been doing a very commendable job trying to mitigate all the damages that measure had caused, and unfortunately in some instances is still been residually causing, but I think that it really does need to be taken account into the budget, not just all the extra costs to get measure to mitigate some of these things, but the need to, I think, switch vendors. They've shown that they are, like ExamSoft before them, too unreliable to use for such a high stakes exam going forward. And I think even if they were the lowest bidder, when you're budgeting out, the costs of these operational issues to applicants and to the State Bar is very high with such a high stakes exam, and you shouldn't be pound wise penny penny wise pound foolish about this. You should try to consider a lot of the operational integrity issues when picking maybe even a higher priced vendor, and budget as necessary to pick the vendor who's overall going to be reliable. I do want to say that, as I told the admission staff when they were in the original bidding process, that if your Prometric is your backup option, my understanding from other standardized tests with Prometric is that they do not allow testing accommodations applicants to schedule less than 45 days out from their approvals. So unless you're able to get that policy changed in your negotiations, you should be cognizant of the incompatibility with the timelines you should be changing anyway. But I do think Prometric is more reliable otherwise there at operational things than Measure, and I doubt they're the only two options out there. So please consider budgeting more money than you have in this attachment for a different vendor for starting with July at least. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Cohn. As always, appreciate the thoughtfulness of your comments. Sam, we have others that may have raised their hand and wish to comment.
Yeah, we have one hand raised from Zoom, Todd Hill.
Mr. Hill, are you there? I see Mr. Hill.
Members of the Finance Committee. My name is Todd Hill, and I'm here to raise concerns about the 2025 budget, fiscal accountability, resource allocation, and transparency of the State Bar regarding litigation strategy and California Public Records Act, or CPRA, compliance. Over the past several months, I've submitted multiple CPRA requests, seeking records related to State Bar oversight, unaccredited law school governance, and regulatory enforcement failures. The State Bar has failed to timely respond to these requests while simultaneously engaging in procedural non-engagement in active litigation. The State Bar's failure to fully engage with CPRA requests raises concerns about resource allocation and commitment to comply with its statutorily mandated obligations. This raises key financial questions. How much money is the State Bar spending to avoid compliance rather than ensuring transparency? Are procedural delays and legal defenses prioritized over fulfilling statutory obligations under CPRA? Does the 2025 budget, which is under discussion today, allocate funds toward proper CPRA processing and litigation risk assessment? The State Bar's Finance Committee has a duty to ensure that public funds are not being used to obstruct public records requests or evade accountability in litigation. Judicial notice motions are currently pending that may formalize the State Bar's procedural failures into court-recognized facts, putting the institution at greater financial risk. Importantly, the committee has an opportunity to ensure that taxpayer dollars are being spent responsibly toward transparency and public trust, rather than unnecessary procedural costs. I respectfully request that the committee include an audit or financial review of how much money is being directed toward litigation avoidance rather than regulatory compliance. The public deserves to know whether resources are being allocated to protect transparency and fulfillment of the State Bar's legal obligations, or to defend against litigation that could have been avoided. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Hill, thank you for your comments. Sam, additional members of the public that are wishing to speak?
There are no other hands raised.
Just to for any of the members of the Board of Trustees, is there anyone at your location that may be interested in making public comments? And I don't doesn't appear like there are any. And so with that, I think we can move to the business before the committee today. All right. I think. Sorry. I thought I heard something. I'm sorry. I think we have basically 3 items before the committee, and I think Araceli is going to present on most of them. I think maybe just to try to set the stage for what the Finance Committee is going to deal with today. There are the first item is an item that deals with a discussion item that deals with relief for attorneys impacted by the LA fires. The second item is a discussion item as it relates to the State Bar General Fund and the Admissions Fund, and the final item is a technical correction that to the rules of the State Bar. The 2 discussion items are before the Finance Committee today. We will pass those items along to the full board, which is my understanding. But the reason why we are hearing them in the Finance Committee today is just in case there are additional materials that we want in those particular items. If there are specific sort of comments or questions that we need answered by the Finance Committee before that could be incorporated into the item before it goes to the full board. Those are the reasons for those discussion items today. And then obviously the last item we'll be taking in action on. And so with that opening, I think we are prepared to take up the first item out of Sally, which is item 2.1.
Great. Good afternoon, Finance Committee members. The first agenda item has to do with thinking about relief measures for attorneys who were impacted by the fires last month in Los Angeles. We are seeking, as Arnie said, this is just a discussion item only. However, we are seeking feedback from the Finance Committee on whether a formal process should be advanced to the board. And just a little bit of background, on January 29th, Governor Newsom did sign an executive order providing relief of annual license fees to certain impacted attorneys that I've documented in the agenda itself. By zip code, sorry, documented in the agenda, the zip codes that were impacted from the Los Angeles fires. So, in the same spirit, we were considering also providing relief to our attorneys for their licensing fees. And there's 3 options that we've documented in this agenda. I'll go through each one, and there's a benefit to each one that we've documented and a consideration to keep in mind. So the first option that the Finance Committee could consider is extending the payment deadline for licensees. Currently, the billing cycle ends on April 1st. That's the deadline for licensees to make their billing payments outside of those that are going to be qualified for the installment payment plan. This payment deadline could be, again, based on the same similar zip codes that were in Governor Newsom's executive order. The deadline, for example, could be July 1st, which is the suspension deadline of the normal billing cycle, or we could consider doing even October 1st, which is the payment deadline of those on the installment plan. The benefit to this particular option would be that it provides a broader relief if there's any attorneys in those zip codes. And there would be no need to review applications by the fee waiver group. So currently there is a process in place for attorneys to submit a fee waiver request. It's an application, and certain board members are part of this fee waiver working group that have to review all of those applications and make a determination accordingly. I guess the consideration for this particular option is that, primarily it could impact the state board's cash flows. We've presented a table in table 1 that shows all of the attorneys that we know that are in these zip codes that have been impacted by the fires. So that would be approximately $1.7 million of revenue that would need to be deferred to some later date, depending on what the decision would be. So that's the consideration, is just deferral of the revenue that we would normally get. Option 2 would be to extend fee waivers to impacted attorneys that submit an application. So an attorney would be required to submit an application. Again, the waiver percentage would be determined on a case-by-case basis. The benefit to this particular option is that there is already a process in place to do this. The consideration from the Finance Committee and ultimately the board would be that because each application would have to be reviewed, depending on the volume, there could be, it could cause administrative burden if there's a high volume of applications that are submitted. And then finally, our third option that's in the agenda is a combination of adopting option 1 and 2 and also provide relief to other reporting requirements. Right now, options 1 and 2 mainly deal with the annual licensee fee. However, there's other reporting requirements such as MCLE, CTAP compliance, and State Bar Rule 2.2. So this third option is really more comprehensive and the most comprehensive form of relief, as it would also include these other reporting requirements. The consideration there, is that there is an associated public protection harm if we defer every single reporting requirement that would be currently be waived if option number 3 were to be considered as the best option. I think that's in a nutshell what the 3 options are. If there's anything else I missed, Leah, to mention, otherwise we'd like to open it to the committee for their input.
Yeah, I think another option that we didn't include would be to really align ourselves with what the governor has directed, which is a 1-year extension. So that's also something for the committee to consider. So I think your options obviously are to say we don't need to do anything, or we should pursue one or some combination of these options.
Thoughts from members of the committee?
Can I ask, Mr. Chair, if, so I saw in the report that there were some calls from attorneys asking for this sort of relief. Do we have any idea of like how many calls we actually did get asking for this sort of a break? And then I would just say that I think my inclination is to go the route of what we've been doing, which I'm a member of that committee of the, getting the applications, screening them, and deciding if they merit some kind of relief. But I'm wondering, what is that going to do to the staff? What do you foresee the volume of that's going to be if we go that route?
We really have no idea. I think that's come my way. It's been two. It's only two. So it's not, some overwhelming volume. Certainly once you announce something like this, we can assume there's going to be more. But you can see from the zip code analysis, the total universe of people that we're talking about is, about 3,500 people, and the likelihood of many of them being fire impacted is, I don't know what the likelihood is. You just kind of extrapolate from there. My gut sense is the volume is not going to be too high, such that we couldn't handle it that way, but we really have no way of knowing.
Other committee members? Trustee Trejo, please.
Certainly, I'm very sensitive to the fires, having been impacted myself and my community out here. I just want to make that statement before stating the fact that we just have to be mindful of the fact that we are an organization in distress. $1.7 million seems rather impactful to me. I think that someone spoke to some of the bureaucratic impact on staff for some of these options. I'd be curious to know what other organizations are doing, maybe other certification organizations, just out of curiosity. I don't know what the medical, I don't know what the medical board is doing. I don't know, frankly, what estheticians are doing. I know that they're heavily regulated. I don't know what other organizations are doing. I think it is something that I would certainly would want to follow in. I just don't know we're in a position to lead in.
So as outlined in the memo, the governor issued an executive order covering all of the other professional licensing entities in the state. And that order does give a 1-year extension on payment of licensing fees. So that's doctors, estheticians, everybody else. So it's a 1-year extension. It's not a waiver, and it's extension. It's longer than the timeframes we've identified, however. And it does not cover any of the other regulatory requirements. And we did outline some options there in the memo as well, like the MCLE requirement, et cetera. Then the only other thing I would say is, I think what you're saying, Trustee Trejo, is not to go with option one and just waive it, or extend it for everybody in the zip code, but rather do more of a finite analysis on impacted individuals. I think that's what you were suggesting, which would be our current process, right? You have to apply, it's reviewed, a yes or no determination is made.
I mean, sure, that sounds like a reasonable. I'm not speaking to that directly necessarily. I just it's just we've been struggling so hard to whatever. I think I want to be helpful. I just want to make sure that we're just mindful of our financial situation. So even as I'm speaking, I'm processing what you've said about what the governor's done. So in those cases, we don't have much of a choice. So I guess we're going to have to bear the brunt of that somewhere else in our income statement, right, or in our balance sheet, because we're going to be short possibly $1.7 million. And in light of some of the other expenses that we're looking at that are more immediate and unexpected, I just wanted to point it out.
Any additional comments from you, Trustee Trejo?
No, thank you.
Trustee Barahona?
Chair, just so that I'm understanding this correctly, Araceli, thank you for the information. In terms of deferring the revenue, that does impact your cash flow. And so I have some curiosity on how we fill that gap, if at all, through any other established source. For us, that would, on a nonprofit scale, that might be like a loan that we have access to cover that period until that revenue is recuperated.
Right. 1.7 million, it is significant. It's not going to break the general fund necessarily. And if it would just be deferring it, 3 months, I think the general fund could do that. If it was longer than a year, like the governor's executive order is proposing, that might be problematic. We're also losing investment income that we would be earning from any, all of that revenue that comes in. Worst case scenario, if needed be, we would probably have to see if we could get some loan from another fund, but obviously that would probably require some kind of statutory change if on a worst case scenario basis, if we really did need to augment the general fund's cash flow. But as you'll see in my the next agenda item on the general fund budget, I'm not sure that 1.7 million would be a problem. If it's not, as long as it's not, I would be probably more concerned if it was longer than a year that we would be deferring that revenue.
Got it. So we could cover the cash flow for that time for specific, hopefully short time period,
right?
Until we regain that revenue. Okay. That being said, it feels like the compromise position might be going with the governor's not the governor's proposal, option 2, which is around keeping our same consistent practice of offering extensions or fee waivers for those that submit applications. I think that helps us control the cost a bit, if we can, and I think keeps our process consistent, because I suspect there's going to be other challenges facing our community in the years and months to come, and keeping one consistent practice, I think, might be helpful. I guess that's my perspective, but curious what my colleagues think.
Other members of the committee with thoughts or comments on this? Trustee Grande?
I think I'm also inclined with option 2, because I think that does give the opportunity for people who really who this would really make a difference for, to be able to submit their application. I mean, I know we don't know how many people it would be, but I do imagine it would be less than option 1. That would be more manageable. But I think that option 2 is that compromise where we can where we can make sure that people who need this additional time get it.
I think that's kind of where I'm leaning as well, but I do have a couple other questions. I don't know if Trustee Buenaventura, if you have thoughts on this.
Oh, no, I think I made my position. I also support option 2. I think it's good that we review it, take it.
So a couple questions on if we were to recommend to the full board option 2, and Araceli and Leah, would we stick to the same timelines that we have right now, meaning that folks would have to sort of submit their fee waiver request by the, I guess the timelines that are currently the timelines that we adhere to, or could we provide folks a little bit of grace in terms of when those FEBA requests would come in, given the fact that, I mean, there's a lot that folks are dealing with right now, and having to fill out one of these things might, I just don't know what else everybody is juggling at this point.
I don't see a reason why we'd have to keep the same process. And I believe that under the current paradigm, it would be due before the end of the billing cycle, which would be is that March 1, Araceli?
April
April
1st.
1, April 1. So it's not due right away, is my point, Trustee Sol, but I don't see a reason why we couldn't extend it. I think we have a lot of flexibility in how to structure that.
Okay. And I think the other thing that I would just ask is, there is a possibility that, you know, folks that have been displaced and maybe no longer are working, that there may be revenue that we just don't get. Is that from these license fees? Is that a fair statement?
I think so. It's always a risk.
Okay. And is there anything that additionally that we would have to do in terms of notification? I guess thinking that folks are displaced, I just don't know. You know, we normally would send probably emails or letters or those sorts of things like that for the license, for the bar fees. Is there something different that we might need to do relative just to alert folks to the process that we're going to use?
Have you thought about that, Araceli?
No, we haven't thought about it, but a good point, Arnie.
The attorneys are required to keep their email addresses with us current. And so we can email all attorneys. We do send all licensee newsletters periodically. I'm not sure when the next one is going out, but certainly we could lead with this. We could also send emails to folks, these 3,000 people in the targeted zip codes, letting them know that this relief has been made available. So those are some two immediate things I can think of. We could post something on the landing page of our website.
Got it. I know we sort of gravitated to option 2, but could you say just a little bit more about the reporting requirements, and whether or not you think we should also consider, from a staff perspective, we should consider making that a part of this recommendation as well?
Well, I think, as laid out in the memo, there are a number of reporting requirements that attorneys have. And so if you're thinking about the circumstance of you've lost your home, your sort of circumstance is quite chaotic, the financial relief is obviously beneficial, but there may also be a significant relief in not having to meet these various regulatory obligations. I did think it was interesting that the Department of Consumer Affairs did not issue or offer that kind of relief, however. And when I did ask the director of the department why that was, she said that she felt that if people were still engaged in active practice, it was important from a public protection perspective that they did comply with those regulatory requirements, which I think makes good sense. So it's a difficult one because I can see arguments on both sides. And so it's really just a policy call for the committee and then the board to make.
Just one other question on that. When you make an application for the fee waiver, could this also be something that's included in that request? Would be to waive your reporting requirements as well, or is that currently a part of the process, or is just a process for the fee waiver?
To my knowledge, it's not currently part of the process. We do not have here the guru of all of this. I don't think he's in the, oh yes, he is. Maybe could you bring Steve Moad in, because he'll know. I don't think it's part of the process currently. I would say we could make it part of the process, but he'll know if we need to do any rule work to make that happen.
Yeah. I feel like I'm a little bit at a disadvantage not being an attorney to understand so the full ramifications of all of this. Steve, I don't know if you were listening and may have heard the line of questioning around the fee waiver process, and whether or not at the time of a fee waiver request, you could also request having reporting requirements waived as well.
I assume you're talking about a deferral as opposed to a true waiver. Is that Is that right? Consistent with the part of the discussion that I did here. Is that right?
I think that's right.
Okay. So yeah, I think the board, it may be a better question for OGC, but I think the board can update the timeframes in the schedule of charges and deadlines without a rule change, and could even conceivably put conditions on that. For example, if somebody had their principal place of employment or their primary residence destroyed in the fire, then they could have a different deadline, for example. But I think we could incorporate that.
Okay. I think I'm looking to my attorney colleagues on the committee, maybe for either some verification as to whether or not they feel like the reporting requirements should be included as a part of this, or they feel like just singularly sort of going with option 2 as presented sort of makes sense, because you're subject to these reporting requirements, and I think Trustee Barahona and Trustee Trejo and I are not, and so I just want to make sure that you feel like we've captured what it is that are requesting, and some of that would go through the process of requesting a fee rate waiver might also want to request this or not. Please, Trustee Grande.
I think that just hearing the perspective from the governor's office on that order, I think it makes sense for us to maintain that, because is there an option to request a waiver of the reporting requirements? I don't think so, right?
No, there.
Yeah. So I mean, I would be inclined, given that, one of our obligations or duties is to protect the public, that it would make sense that we maintain those reporting requirements, and follow the model that the governor has implemented or ordered.
Okay. My only other comment, just to go back to a question I asked, is, do we feel like there needs to be any additional time given, or do we feel like April 1st is an adequate period of time for folks under option 2 to submit these requests? Not seeing any staff thoughts on that.
I would just offer that it may be difficult for us to know whether somebody is not paying because they have not yet submitted their request, or whether they're not paying because they have not paid. And because we impose a non-compliance fee shortly after the deadline, within a few days of the deadline, I would not want somebody to get caught up in that, and then that fee needs to be manually reversed. It's not that we can't do it, but depending on how many people are in that situation, that may be problematic, or it would delay the non-compliance fee from being applied to everybody. But short of that, we can definitely do it.
So Steve, is that an argument, or at least a comment to say keep the deadline as it is?
I suppose it's an argument for it. It's certainly not dispositive, however.
Okay. At least I think I'm hearing, unless there's some additional comments, I think what I'm hearing, the will of the committee is that we go with option 2 as a recommendation to the full board without any sort of changes in the current process. Is that fair?
Yeah, and expand option 2. Are we hearing expand option 2 to allow for a request to waive regulatory requirements, or no? I think no. Okay. All right.
All right. I just want to make sure that that's, I'm repeating what I think that I heard. Trustee Barahona?
Yes, sorry, Chair, just to confirm, that would mean that we are aligning with the executive order, but the way we're going to procedurally do that is by having folks submit applications. Is that sort of like they're both connected? So I do think Trustee Grande reminding us about this order and sort of being in alignment with that order feels important. And the way we're going to achieve it is by these applications.
That's
Is
correct.
that okay?
Right. And I think in some ways we might go beyond it, right? Because we could do waivers, not just extensions.
Okay. And Lee, will you just remind us, Trustee Buenaventura indicated that he's a part of that committee, but who are the other trustees that are a part of that committee?
I don't know if Louisa knows. I believe it's Jose, our vice chair.
Okay.
It's only two.
Okay. You know, I guess Trustee Buenaventura, I mean, all I can say is that, you know, given what the will of the full board is, there may be, I don't know what the normal level of workload might be, but obviously could be a very, very sort of significant increase in the number of sort of requests that are coming your way.
Gotcha. It's been actually an interesting committee. It's actually it's a good read and it's a good debate among the colleagues on there. So I appreciate the work looking forward.
Okay, very good. We good with this? And I think so. If so, Araceli, we mind moving to agenda item 2.2?
Sure. So this next item is, again, it's informational discussion only. There's no action item requested from the Finance Committee, but it is the review of the 2025 budget, and it's going to specifically focus on the general fund and admissions budget, since those are the two that, you know, we've historically had structural deficits in both of those. The board meeting next week, we're going to highlight the bar-wide budget and focus on other funds as well. But for this particular agenda item, I'm only focusing on the general fund and the admissions budgets. I don't have a presentation, but I am going to ask Sam. I'm going to go through the assumptions that we've used to build this budget for each the general fund and admissions. I'm going to ask Sam to just show it's table 1 and table 2 in the agenda, which is what the results of our budget for 2025 are, unless there's feedback from the Finance Committee to consider other assumptions. But let me go back to my agenda. For starters, as I mentioned, you know, we've historically in prior years have presented the general fund in a deficit spending position. We have had to rely on our reserves, so they have been decreasing year over year. I think, you know, all of the committee members here remember that we submitted our fee request last year to the legislature. We got approved for $88, which is composed of four items. One is $52 that was meant to fund our staff salaries and benefits. That particular portion of that $52 portion, just as a reminder, does sunset on 1/1/2028. So we only received it for 3 years. The second component of the $88 was $15 to fund our San Francisco lease cost. That portion also sunsets, but not until January 1st, 2030. And then the other 2 portions is $10 to fund our IT license cost. And the last portion, the $11, was to fund 13 new positions to support CTAP and the diversion programs. So with the fee increase, you know, definitely the general fund absolutely needed that fee increase, and we've been able to show better results, particularly in forecast years. So as you can see here, preliminarily, unless things change, our 2025 budget revenue is about just under $117 million, and our expenses are just short of $122 million. Yes, we are still deficit spending by just $4.7 million. A big portion of that is the RIF cost that you know, we actually are in the process of already rolling out the program. So we always knew 2025 was going to be a deficit spending year because of the RIF costs. So I do want to focus on the budget assumptions that we use to build the 2025 budget and also the 26 to 28 forecast years. So on the revenue side, there's very, very minimal growth that we use for licensees. We don't expect there to be much growth. It was only 0.17% growth based on the attorney population growth estimates. So it's very minimal, but that's all our colleagues in mission advancement in the MAD office were able to provide based on our attorney population analysis for growth estimates. We did also include in here on the revenue side in the general fund $4 million of additional revenue that we're expected to generate from the Fresh Start Settlement Program. This program used to be called, we formerly called it the Offer and Compromise Program. We've now renamed it to the Fresh Start Settlement Program that actually kicked off this week. So we're anticipating, crossing my fingers to get roughly $4 million, which half of it we were allowed to put into the general fund in 2025. The other half is going to stay in the client security fund. It also included in here is obviously that $11 revenue to fund the 13 positions for CTAB and the diversion programs. Included in the expense side, as you can see here, there's a line item underneath personnel cost for a RIF, which in the general fund is only 36 positions. We were anticipating 50, but it's actually only 36 that ended up applying. So that cost of the RIF in the general fund is a $3.2 million hit in 2025. And also in here is a one-time, that $2 million transfer is the one-time $2 million transfer from the client security back into the general fund as a reimbursement that was also permitted per the bill. Just to highlight a few other assumptions for the forecast years, the same attorney growth, 0.17%. We don't foresee any additional growth in future years. As you can see in 2028, we go negative again, and that's because the $52 goes away. And according to the bill, we did also apply in all future forecast years a CPI increase, both on the revenue and expense sides outside of personal cost, of course, because those are actual, we can do known, more accurate cost analysis there. And one reminder, in the second half of 2027 is when we will be required to pay the first portion of the unfunded accrued liability, what we call the UAL. And that is a result of giving our employees that additional 2-year service credit, the golden handshake piece. And obviously that comes with the cost in the future for the UAL. So because it happens in the later half, it's about $800,000 that we have to add starting in 2027. And then in 2028, it's the full year's worth of the UAL. So that's about a 1.6 million that we've had to add of additional expenditures. We are also, if you look at underneath personnel costs under the RIF, there's an attrition line item. And we are expecting to have additional attrition, normal attrition in future years of about 3 FTEs per month that we are not planning on backfilling. So that's saving us those amounts that you see there for 2026 through 2028. So overall, my highlights are the key takeaways. The general fund, if the RIF wasn't happening in 2025, we would be deficit spending by 1.5 million, which is a lot lower than we have historically. In the past few years, the finance committee members that have been on this committee, we've been deficit spending in the mid upper teens to even 20 million deficit spending. And this is the first year that, if the RIF aside, we would only be about $1.5 million deficit spending. So which is pretty good. And 2026 and 2027, really, if you look at our we are basically in a surplus, finally in a surplus spending position for once, and since I've been here, certainly. So I think that's something that I definitely wanted to highlight is we've done a lot of cost cutting measures, and obviously the fee was very helpful in the general fund, such that we've now are converting to surplus spending at least more or less in 2026 and 2027. 2028, of course, as you can see, and as I mentioned, we do fall back into deficit spending because the $52 goes away. If we were to keep the $52 for 2028, that equates to approximately 10.2 million. So if we were to add 10.2 million in revenue, our deficit spending would be about 3.6 million in 2028. And certainly we could find other cost reduction measures to be able to at least break even in 2028 if we were able to keep that $52, but just something to consider since this $52 does go away. One last point I want to highlight that's not included in the budget, but it is included in the agenda. There is a pretty significant expense that we are expecting to incur in 2027 related to our Los Angeles building. The air handlers, need to be replaced. And we've gotten estimates, and these were 2024 estimates, that the project could cost almost $4 million. Now, there is a lot of uncertainty in future costs, so it's not included in the budget. We don't know how much the actual costs are going to be. We still need to, initiate a bidding process. But because it is a significant expense, I wanted to raise it to the Finance Committee's attention. It's not in the budget, but, it is something we're going to have to incur. And when we get better numbers, at that point in time, we can certainly include it in the budget. But preliminary estimates that we received, the general services received in 2024, or that the project could cost $4 million. So now I can move to the general, not the general fund, sorry, the admissions fund. Really,
Araceli, can we do this just?
Yeah, or I could take questions on this one before moving as well.
Yes, could we do that, please? Questions from committee members on just the general fund proposed budget plan as well as the forecast. Looking to say, I don't see any hands just yet, Araceli, but if I could ask just two quick questions.
Sure.
One is under lease revenue, that's lease revenue that we're getting from the that's attached with the LA building.
Yes, that's from Smart and Final, correct.
Okay, and that lease is not going to. I don't know how long that lease is for, but clearly it's not changing during this forecast period.
No.
Correct.
Okay, and the other thing is with the, if I'm remembering correctly, with what the governor just did around and the legislature just did around special fund, the special sort of fund allocation related to immigrant legal defense. Is there a certain amount of money that that the bar is getting? I mean, I think it's a pass through. Is that correct? And is there a certain sort of admin fee that we get to take as it relates to that? And is that included in the budget? I hope I'm remembering this correctly.
It's 10 million coming through the Equal Access Fund, I believe. And we do take some administrative fees from that Equal Access pass-through distribution that we do. I don't know if on this 10 million that's been prohibited, nor do I think it's in the budget, because that just happened since we finalized this.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. The one thing I would also note is as I read the item is that we haven't closed the books on 2024. And when we close the books on 2024, there is expected to be, we'll have a better sense of what the reserves are.
Yes, correct. So one thing I think you already forgot to highlight, we are still closing our books. This is the budget should be pretty set, but there are certain accounting adjustments that we do at year end that impacts the working capital, which is a reserve. It will have an impact on it. I think by the board meeting next week, I'll have a better idea what the reserves are. But just as a reminder, at mid-year, we had projected the general fund to be, gosh, I think it was around 16 million ending in 2024. We will fine tune that, but just as a reminder, what we had projected at mid-year for the general fund to end, 16 million, I want to say.
And Araceli, for the board meeting, will this table get updated prior to that, or you'll just speak to that at the board meeting?
No, I don't expect anything to change unless there's direction from the finance committee that to do certain assumptions differently. I expect these numbers to stay relatively what you see here. We will present additional funds in the budget item next week, bar wide, and as well as the reserves for the expected revenues and expenses and all the other funds, not just the general fund and not just the admissions fund.
Okay.
All right, so I guess our projected was almost 19 million at mid-year is what we were projecting. Right, my team just corrected me on that. So okay. Definitely with the sale of the building, our reserves were have increased and we're in a better position to be able to absorb some of our deficit spending.
Okay. Well, let's keep moving to the admissions fund.
Okay. The admissions fund, as you can see here, they're doing a lot better, which is very good. Again, admissions was one of those funds that had a significant structural deficit. There's been a lot of change that staff has done staff has done to turn things around. We obviously had a lot of the fee increase in the last year and a half for all of the admissions programs. That's all reflected here. For 25, their revenue is expected to be about 32 million and their expenses just under 29 million. So they're actually in a surplus spending position, really all years, as you can see, starting with 2025. Just some of the assumptions that we used to build this budget. As I mentioned in the revenue, it reflects all of the service fee increases that we've adopted in the prior year. Included in here is the $4.1 million that's been approved by the board for the examination administration expenses. There's also a very small portion, as you can see here, of the RIF that certain admission folks are taking. It's very small, but nonetheless, it's about $200,000 of the RIF component that belongs in admissions. And then the forecast years 25 to 27, we applied more or less the same assumptions as the general fund. They all include that CPI increase of 3.5%, pardon me, for revenue and expense categories. So that's how admissions increased fees, and also their management or cost saving measures on the expense side has really helped drive a surplus position from 25, as I mentioned, to all future years. There are gonna be certain additional expenses that admissions will probably have to incur. However, as you can see, even in 2025, it's a surplus position of 3.3 million. So should there need to be additional expenses incurred related to the bar exam, I think the admissions fund is going to be able to absorb that. And I just want to highlight the importance of admissions basically completely flipping around their deficit spending in the 2024 budget that was adopted last year. Before the transition to the delivery bar exam remote/hybrid format, they were actually forecasted to be in deficit spending from 25 to 27, and this is the complete opposite. And it's really in part because of transitioning to the exam and other cost saving measures that we've undertaken. So I just want to highlight that that's a very, very important point for the admissions. And there is one last item that I wanted to highlight in particular to admissions that's not in this agenda item. It's just something that has come up in the last few days. We will be allowing for certain reimbursements for those applicants that have been impacted by all of these issues that we've encountered because of measure learning. We're allowing applicants to be able to submit an application to reimburse for certain costs that they've been impacted, whether it's lodging, hotels, etc., maybe flight cancellations or additional flight change fees. So we're proposing to add an additional 125,000 in the general fund and an additional 125,000 in the admissions fund to be able to reimburse applicants that have been impacted by the issues we've had with measured learning. That's not currently reflected in here, but it would be 125,000 in each admissions and in the general fund to hit to expenses. That'll be reflected in the board meeting agenda presented, but it's currently not here since it was something that came up this week. Anything on that, Leah, that particular topic?
Yeah, I was just going to say thanks for bringing that up, Araceli, because based on some of the conversations that we had at that joint committee between the executive committee and the contracts committee, there was some discussion about some additional things we may want to do for the February exam registrants, and so I think how you laid it out, Araceli, is how I walked away from some of those conversations and some of that discussion in terms of some of the additional sort of planning that was going on relative both the general fund and the admissions fund. Is that Leah and Araceli, am I correct on that?
Yeah, I think there's just, as Benjamin Cohn stated in his public comment, and he's made, I think, really helpful public comments actually recently, highlighting some of the challenges that have been present for folks trying to register for this exam. It's been quite messy, and I think we need to recognize that and try to make some accommodation for folks. And so we have come up with this proposed approach where we would reimburse some expenses at this juncture, primarily related right now to those who have been scheduled who live out of state and have been scheduled to come to take the test in California because the out-of-state testing centers were not made available to them. We've worked with the test administration vendor to open up testing centers in the East Coast and Central time zones. And so we'd like to support people in not having to come to California, recognizing they may have already booked flights, etc., may incur some cancellation fees. That seems like a great group to target initially. And then there are some other impacted test takers that we'd like to consider authorizing reimbursement for. And so, as Araceli mentioned, we've identified 2 different funding sources. One is a very unexpected kind of windfall to the general fund stemming from OGC's really effective work in bankruptcy proceedings and collecting debt for the state bar. That's the $125,000, and then another $125,000 potentially from the admissions fund. And you see here, it is running in surplus position. You know that we will be needing to add additional costs in 2025 to deal with some of the exam administration issues. But I'm comfortable that we do have a sufficient positive fund balance there to accommodate $125,000 in travel expenses if the board agrees with this proposal.
Very good. Any additional comments or questions from members of the committee? I don't see any hands, and so
I think Patricia has her hand up.
oh, she does.
Arnie.
I do see it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Trustee Barahona, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, Chair. I think I just wanted to say thank you so much for your work on this. It's really helpful to see it laid out. And I think as a committee, as we look to the future, I think we're going to need a few things. And I'm curious, Leah and Araceli, kind of what you think. It does feel like we need to consider a list of other revenue generating opportunities. Like, I think that's core to getting in a different position. We're operating on a certain amount of revenue right now. I think other revenue generating opportunities is really important. I think I have a lot of curiosity on our investment strategy. I realize it is a conservative one, but the appetite for risk should be considered. Just to put that out there and be clear, I think it's important for us to think about that and not necessarily act on it, but just think about it. I think that the third thing is I think that there has to be our work is so critical and so important. And I do think that there are programs that the philanthropy could support and could get behind and can hold. And I know we've talked about this in our private and public partnerships committee. And so I do think that, there's a way to gather that information here to really uplift the stories and the work, the critical work that we're doing that I think philanthropy can potentially fund, albeit in small ways. I think that other revenue is really helpful. And I think the last thing I'll just say is like, I think there has to be a pretty methodical strategy. Araceli, as you were talking about keeping the $52, I kept thinking, well, what would we need to do to keep the $52? What would we need to do between now and I think it's 2028 or 2027? I'm sorry, I forget the year. Like, what would need to be happening consistently to ensure that we would get those? So it just made me think of the future and different, perhaps strategies we should consider. And Leah, I know that a lot of that is already happening. But just wanted to make sure to share
that. We do have, as part of our, particularly in the Office of Finance, what you see in the general fund as other revenues. We don't have control over what we charge for mandatory fees, but any other fees any other programs or fees for programs that are in the general fund, we are going to do every 3 years, we're going to do an assessment to make sure that we're charging the right amount of fees. In the meantime, in between years, we are adding this CPI increase So that certainly has helped us, better position ourselves. Investment income, you're right. We follow the California investment policy, which tends to be pretty strict. We had been really, doing really well on the investment income just because the rates had been pretty high, but they're starting to come down. They're starting to come down. They're not as high as they were last year. For investment income that, has helped us get, through last year certainly isn't going to be as high as it has been. Certainly.
Very good. Are there any other comments on or questions on this one? Thank you for your comments, Trustee Barahona. And I think the one thing that I would also be interested in is with the RIF, and everything. I think I may need just a reminder, and it doesn't need to be done right now. But when we get out to the 27, 28 sort of time frame, what our staffing levels actually are going to be at that point. Would just like to have a better sense of that. Like I said, doesn't necessarily have to. If you don't have the answer now, it's okay. But maybe by the time of the board.
Okay. I mean, the aim, the bill
says 15%.
It says 15% by April 2027. As you can see in the general fund, we had, I think we had said it would be about 40, I want to say it was 45, 46 positions. We're at 36, right? So we didn't achieve that vacancy rate as part of the RIF. We do still experience natural attrition. So we're hoping, the additional 36 positions really that we're hoping to achieve in 2026 and 2027 will get us to that 15% or really over that 15%. I can't remember how many employees we have right now in the general fund specifically, but the 15% equated to about 45, 46 positions.
We can include that in the February agenda item. And I think that one of the important things here, right, is this budget assumes that we are experiencing natural attrition every year and that we are not backfilling 3 of those positions every month. So this budget already assumes that we're becoming quite a bit smaller. If you could put the general fund back up, Sam, instead of admissions, it assumes that we are getting quite a bit smaller every year through natural attrition, in addition to the accelerated bump we receive from the RIF. So we can get you those numbers for the February meeting. I did want to take the opportunity to highlight sort of what Araceli did on the admissions side. We were looking at a real impossible situation in our general fund had we not gotten a fee increase, and the year before had we not sold our building. So I just want to give some recognition to how far we've come. You're looking at pretty modest deficit spending this year, taking out the one-time costs associated with the RIF, of course, and then really insignificant, deficit spending in 2026. We're in a positive position in 2027. These are not sort of balance sheets we've seen for a long time at the State Bar. So I do want to recognize that piece, and also just to remind the board that we didn't get everything that we said we needed to maintain status quo operations, setting aside even the 15% target vacancy rate. So we're continue to operate at a deficit when you look at the licensing fee revenue we said we needed, particularly to pay our lease costs in San Francisco versus what we got. So that's an important thing for the board to remember. So it's really been beneficial that the board did authorize this RIF to give us some breathing room here as we move forward.
Thanks for that, Leah. Any additional comments on this item? I think Araceli and Leah, there were some additional sort of ask in preparation for the full board meeting that Trustee Barahona had a couple of suggestions and as well as some thoughts from me just in terms of just some other answers to some questions and some other data points for the full board. Okay.
Yes.
I think we're good there.
Mhm.
I hope the last item, which is a technical one, can go pretty quick. I don't want to hold folks very long, how much longer, but I think we're good for item 2.3, which is an action item.
Correct. Sam, can you take off? Yeah, thank you. So this last item is our only action item. It is technical corrections to our schedule of charges and deadlines. This particular schedule was actually approved by the board at the November 2022 meeting, and it's a schedule that outlines all of the fees that the state bar currently charges. There's 3 proposed technical corrections that we caught that we are asking for approval to make. So I'm going to go through through each of those. There's 4 actually, really quickly. The first one is update on the inspection fee for Category C of the unaccredited law schools. The schedule showed the fee to be 36,500, but the actual fee needs to be 36,250. It's an error, an error that we caught. Just to be clear, there has been no law school that has paid the incorrect fee to date, and there's currently no Category C unaccredited law schools, but we do need to correct that. And just for your information, that's that change. So sorry, let me back up really quick. Attachment A is the red line version of all of the changes, and attachment B is the clean. This particular change is reflected on page 29 of the PDF. I'll move on to the second one. The second one, it's updating the law corporation and LLP's limited liability partnership renewal deadlines. Currently, the Division of Regulation is working to automate the renewal applications. It's a very manual process right now, and they're working to automate that. So we want to propose deferring the deadlines for those 2 LLPs and law corps after the automation is complete. So what that change would entail is currently, law corporations has a 3/30 renewal deadline, and LLPs has a October 1st renewal deadline. We want to combine them, or not combine them, excuse me, align them to have the same deadline. So the proposed change would have the renewal deadline be August 1st for both of those LLP and Law Corp programs. And then the associated fee, which is currently May 3rd, would then move to September 1st, and then add a suspension deadline for both of October 1st. So all of those changes are reflected on pages 8 and 10 of the PDF. The third item that we are proposing is to eliminate the separate legal specialization MCLE fee. Initially, the legal spec MCLE fees were historically add-ons to the standard MCLE fees. In 2022, we did a big comprehensive review to make sure all of the fees were raised to what they could be, and those were put forth to the Finance Committee and the board, and those were approved around 2023. The intent was for the consolidated legal spec MCLE fees to be combined into one single MCLE fee for single activity providers and multiple activity providers. There was an oversight in the schedule of charges and deadlines, to remove the legal spec MCLE fee. So our proposal today is asking to remove the legal specialization MCLE fee. And that change is reflected on page 7 of the PDF. So that section would just come out completely. And the fourth, there's just some formatting errors that we've caught that are being in Schedule A. They're outlined throughout the various pages. But it's just general edits to make the document more uniform. So those are the four proposed changes that we're requesting for approval today. There's any questions?
Very good. Seems fairly straightforward to me, unless I'm missing something, but they seem really very sort of technical and sort of straightforward, and just sort of making sure that our various programs and the fee structures are aligned when we lose some deadlines and those sorts of things. And help me, other trustees, if I may have missed something. But at least that is from the presentation and from what I read, that's what it sounds like, very technical. Okay. Other comments or questions? With that, without seeing any, please put the resolution up, and can I get maybe a motion in a second, and we'll be on our way for this evening.
I'll make the motion.
A second.
So, motion was made by trustee Buenaventura and seconded by trustee Grande. Sam, can I get you to call the roll, please?
Yes, Barahona,
Aye.
Buenaventura,
Aye.
Grande,
Aye.
Trejo,
Aye.
and Sewell.
Aye.
The motion carries. Sorry, 5 ayes and 0 nays. The motion carries.
Very good. Thank you for that, Sam. I think the one thing I'll just say, so that I think we're ready to adjourn, but just sort of walking out of here is Araceli, you reminded me of this in your presentation on the general fund and the admissions fund, is that you at the full board will go through the other, all our other funds as well, correct?
Yes, yes, correct.
Okay, very good. Very good. All righty. Any further business that we need to address this evening? I don't believe there is. All righty. I think we're adjourned and we'll see everyone, hopefully everyone next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.